Raid Precautions was an organization in the United Kingdom set up in 1937 dedicated to the protection of civilians from the danger of air raids. It included the Raid Wardens Service that was to report on bombing incidents. Every local council was responsible for organizing ARP Wardens, messengers, ambulance drivers, rescue parties and liaison with police and fire brigades. For the 1st of September 1939, ARP Wardens enforced the blackout. Heavy curtains and shutters were required on all private residences, commercial premises, and factories to prevent light escaping and so making them a possible target for enemy bombers to locate their targets. With increased enemy bombing during the Blitz, the ARP services were central in reporting and dealing with bombing incidents. They managed the air raid sirens and ensured people were directed to shelters. From 1941, the ARP officially changed its title to Civil Defense Service to reflect the wider range of roles it then encompassed. During the war, almost 7,000 civil defense workers were killed. In all, some 1.4 million men and women served as ARP Wardens during World War II. The Civil Defense Service was stood down after the end of the war in Europe on the 2nd of May 1945. Origins. During the First World War, Britain was bombed by Zeppelins and Gotha bombers, and it was predicted that large-scale aerial bombing of the civilian population would feature prominently in any future war. In 1924, the Committee of Imperial Defense set up a subcommittee to look at what measure could be taken to protect the civil population from aerial attack. The new committee, known as Air Raid Precautions, was headed by the then Lord Privy Seal, Sir John Anderson. For the next 10 years, this committee looked into issues of new aerial weapons development and the possible impact on civilians. The use of gas attacks in the First World War played heavy on the decisions, and protection via gas masks was a core decision taken by the committee. Every single person would need a gas mask, which meant nearly 40 million would be required. Together with ideas around the building of air raid shelters, evacuations of people and blackout requirements, these were all termed under passive air defense. With the rise of Hitler during the 1930s, a further Home Office committee, the Air Raid Precautions Department, was created. For the 1st of April 1935, it was this department that was direct the British response to passive air defense. In April 1937, the Air Raid Wardens Service was created, which aimed to seek some 800,000 volunteers. On the 1st of January 1938, the Air Raid Precautions Act came into force. This compelled all local authorities to begin creating their own ARP services. With the threat of war imminent in 1939, the Home Office issued dozens of leaflets advising people on how to protect themselves from the inevitable air-water follow ARP duties. The ARP services were to include several specialist branches. Wardens. ARP Warden ensured the blackout was observed, sounded air raid sirens, safely guided people into public air raid shelters, issued and checked gas masks, evacuated areas around unexploded bombs, rescued people where possible from bomb-damaged properties, located temporary accommodation for those who had been bombed out, and reporting to the control center about incidents, fires, etc., and to call in other services as required. Report and control. Central headquarters that received information from wardens and messengers and managed the delivery of the relevant services needed to deal with each incident. Messengers, often Boy Scouts or boys brigade members aged between 14 and 18 as messengers or runners, would take messages from wardens and carry them to either the sector post or the control center. Bombing would sometimes cut telephone lines, and messengers performed an important role as giving the ARP services a fuller picture of events. First aid parties trained to give first response first aid to those injured in bombing incidents. ambulance drivers. Casualties from bombing were taken to first aid posts, a hospital, by volunteer drivers. There were also stretcher parties that carried the injured to posts. Rescue services. The rescue services were involved in getting the dead and injured out of bombed premises. Gas decontamination. Specialists to deal with and clean up incidents involving chemical and gas weapons. Fire guards. Following the destruction caused by the bombing of the City of London in late December 1940, the Fire Watcher scheme was introduced in January 1941. All buildings in certain areas had to have a 24-hour watch kept. In the event of fire, these fire watchers could call on the rescue services and ensure they could access the building to deal with incidents. Second World War. Local councils were responsible for organizing all the necessary ARP services in their areas. Although the standard procedures prescribed that the ideal warden should be at least 30 years old, men and women of all ages were wardens. In certain instances, given special needs of communities, even teenagers were wardens. The role of ARP was open to both men and women, but only men could serve in the gas contamination, heavy and light rescue and demolition services. Control of a local authority's warden service was through a chief warden to whom each sector's area warden would report. Within metropolitan boroughs, the initial aim was to have one warden to every 500 residents, reporting from individual warden posts, each with its own post warden. Post wardens received messages from the local wardens which they passed to the central report and control headquarters. ARP wardens were initially set up in temporary posts and later in purpose-built facilities, mainly at the junctions of roads. In cities, a warden post was responsible for a small area with 5 wardens to every 4–5,000 people. In London there were approximately 10 posts to the square mile, divided into sectors. Each post had between 3 and 6 wardens who had local knowledge of the location of shelters, utilities, what buildings contained and who was resident in the sector. ARP wardens had the task of patrolling the streets during blackout, to ensure that no light was visible. If a light was spotted, the warden would alert the people responsible by shouting something like, "Put that light out." They could report persistent offenders to the local police. During the 7-month phony war period following the outbreak of war in September 1939, ARP wardens mainly offered advice, issued gas masks and air raid shelters, and enforced the blackout. The Blitz. The role of ARP services came into their own during the Blitz of 1940–41. Arrow control centers would sound the air raid sirens and wardens would marshal people into the shelters and then watch out for the fall of any bombs within the sector, often done during air raids and therefore highly dangerous. When the wardens came across the site of a bombing, they were telephone for the emergency services, render first aid to victims with minor injuries, and deal with small fires. Other ARP units included light and heavy rescue parties, and first aid and stretcher parties, and messenger boys. Other duties included helping to police areas suffering bomb damage and helping bombed-out householders, and to keep an emergency under control until official rescue services arrived. For the 1st of September 1939, a small percentage of ARP wardens were full-time and were paid a salary, but most were part-time volunteers who carried out their ARP duties as well as full-time jobs. Part-time wardens were supposed to be on duty about 3 nights a week, but this increased greatly when the bombing was heaviest. 1 in 6 was a woman, and amongst the men there were a significant number of veterans of World War I. Uniform. At the beginning of the war, ARP Wardens had no uniform, but wore their own clothes, and in October 1939 issued with blue-et overalls with a red-on-black ARP badge. From the formation of the ARP until 1939, the badges were made of solid sterling silver, with a crescent-shaped buttonhole attachment for men and a pin-style brooch for women. From 1940 on, the badges were made of a base metal. From May 1941, full-time and regular part-time wardens were issued with dark blue battle dress and beret. Women were issued with a four-pocket tunic, again in dark blue serge with skirt. Helmets. ARP service personnel were issued with Mk2 British helmets. These were often not made to the same level as issued to soldiers to reduce costs. These helmets, which had less resistance to ballistic impact, would have small holes drilled in the rim to show they were not for frontline use. Depending on the role of the person, the helmet would be marked with a letter or letters to easily allow others to ascertain the role at an incident. W for Wardens. Rank within the Warden Service was denoted by a white helmet and black bands. R for Rescue Services. AP First Aid Parties. SP Stretcher Party. A Ambulance Drivers. M Messenger Runner. Numbers. By the outbreak of war, there were more than 1.5 million were involved in the various ARP services. There were around 1.4 million ARP wardens in Britain during the war. Full-time ARP staff peaked at just over 131,000 in December 1940. By 1944, with the decreasing threat from enemy bombing, the total of full-time ARP staff had dropped to approximately 67,000. The volunteers in 1944 numbered nearly 800,000. Civil defense regions. Mainland Britain was divided in 11 CD regions. Each has a headquarters and controlled the services in that region. Region 1 Northern Newcastle. Region 2 Northeastern Leeds. Region 3 North Nottingham. Region 4 Eastern Cambridge. Region 5 London. Region 6 Southern Reading. Region 7 Southwestern Bristol. Region 8 Wales Cardiff. Region 9 Midland Birmingham. Region 10 0 Northwestern Manchester. Region 11 Scotland Glasgow. Region 12 Northern Ireland Belfast. Medals. Many wardens went considerably beyond the call of duty, and a search of medal citations in the London Gazette demonstrates this. The first ARP warden to receive the George Cross was Thomas Alderson, who won his award for actions saving civilian life in Bridlington in 1940. Gallery of ARP photographs. ARP wardens in popular culture. In the television series Dad's Army, the officious chief ARP warden Hodges is a recurring character. In the Disney film Bedknobs and Broomsticks, an ARP warden can be seen in the background during the Portobello Road sequence. The ITV television series Foyle's War features ARP wardens in several episodes. Agatha Christie mentions them in the Miss Marple novel 4.50 from Paddington.